Hello, and welcome to Mystic Dog Mama, the podcast for soul led dog mamas, where you'll discover how to best nourish your dog and yourself, mind, body, and soul. I'm your host, Dr. Alexia Meller. In case this is your first time here, thank you so much. Welcome. I'm so glad that you're here. And if you are a returning listener, I am so grateful for you. Thank you for being here and thank you for helping to create this amazing community that we're growing. It is such a pleasure to be here with you, and I am just completely grateful. So, yes, let's get going. Today's episode is all about nutrition. So for the past 3 years or so, I guess I would say like I've been at least shoulder deep, probably even deeper and full time in my professional canine nutrition studies. And it's been a really amazing, intense experience with a lot of different rabbit holes, but that I've really enjoyed going down. And I'm really looking forward to sharing a lot of what I've been learning with you so that you can help optimize your dog's health using fresh food. But after a couple of episodes that I've done specifically on nutrition, particularly the conversations I had with Dr. Tom Lonsdale that was focused on raw meaty bones as the kind of core of a canine diet. And then again, when I talked to Kay Stewart of the Feed Real Institute about how we want to think about putting a diet together, a lot of you reached out to me with some different questions on that. And then I also got more questions after the release of the Forever Dog Life book by Dr. Karen Becker and Rodney Habib. And you guys were kind of asking me like what my thoughts were on the book and was it a useful purchase, that sort of thing. So I thought that I would actually start a series specifically focused on nutrition. So if there are particular topics or particular questions or areas of nutrition and diet that you want to know more about, let me know. Send me a direct message on Instagram at Mystic Dog Mama and let me know what your biggest questions are, and I will do some episodes specifically on that. But I thought today that actually maybe what might be nice for this kind of summer solo series that I'm doing was just a kind of quick review of my take, my thoughts on the Forever Dog Life book, in case you're thinking of buying it and you want to see like what my take is on it and whether or not it would be a good fit for you. So that's what I'm going to do today. And just a disclaimer that this is a totally unsolicited review, and these are just my opinions as a dog mama and a canine nutrition and wellness consultant. And I invite you to check the book out and see if it's a good fit for you. All right. So to start off with, it's actually absolutely visually stunning. It's a hardcover book, which is good to know. And the images are just beautiful. Let's see if you can see these if you're watching. Um, and it's broken up into two main parts. The first part is focused on food, and the second part is focused on things that you can be doing inside and outside of the home to better support your dog's health. And I love that they use the LIFE acronym, which brings attention to a more holistic picture of how we want to think about health and supporting our dog's health. And so the L stands for lifestyle, which includes things like enrichment, love, exercise, proactive medical care. Then the I is for ideal microbiome. The F is for food. And then the E is for environment and stress. And Karen and Rodney start the book by referencing Bobby, who was believed to be one of the longest living dogs. He lived in Portugal. And specifically, they were looking at his lifestyle and the different foods that he ate. So they actually went over and met Bobby and met with his family to get a better sense of like, how was this dog able to live for so long? What were the various conditions that were supporting his longevity? And this is something that I think is really important to remember. Bobby's family fed him like so many dogs get fed in all different parts of the world, and how we used to in the West feed our dogs in past generations. So he basically got the scraps of the family's food. But it's important to note that where they're living and the way that they have kind of orchestrated their own lifestyle is such a healthy way of living. And I think it's actually considered like a blue zone where they live. So one of those areas in the world where people tend to live really long, healthy lives themselves. And so Bobby, as the dog, was benefiting from that. So he got scraps of their food. that included things like they would catch rabbits or like wild rabbits, and they would give him the carcass after they had removed the meat that they wanted for themselves. Because it was close to the water, they were always eating grilled fish. And so that meant a lot of healthy omega-3s for Bobby that he would get. They had an organic farm, and so organic vegetables. They also grew different types of herbs, like medicinal herbs. So Bobby had the opportunity to go and self-select things when he needed them. And he also had a really active social life. They talked about how he and the neighborhood dogs would like regularly kind of gather one another up and go off for walks. So all of these things kind of contributed to Bobby having a really long, healthy, and happy life. So I just wanted to kind of bring that to the fore because I think it also needs to be noted that Bobby's family wasn't sitting around measuring ingredients and working towards a formulated recipe. And I'm definitely not saying that you shouldn't be thinking about what you're putting into your dog's bowl, because I do think we need to be thinking about what we're putting in and importantly, why we're putting that in. What purpose is that serving for our dog's body, for the dog's health? But I also think that in our kind of pursuit for longevity for our dogs, sometimes we can kind of lose the plot and become super obsessed, micromanage what's going into the bowl, and make things a lot more complicated than they necessarily need to be. So that's just kind of my caveat for how how I approach canine nutrition generally, how I approach my own nutrition generally, and how I'm going to talk to you about this book. Okay, so the first chapter of the book focuses on the kind of basics of nutrition, but this is actually where I think things could be made way more clear for the average pet parent. Because I know that when I first started out making Lucky's food, I was so overwhelmed with what I was finding online. And I basically just wanted someone to simplify it for me and to tell me, like, what is the food pyramid for dogs? Like, what are the basic things that I need to be including in my dog's diet? And a note on that, I'm going to get to that at the very end. So if you're interested in what I look at as the kind of using that kind of that model of a food pyramid, what do I break it down into the basics of what a dog's diet should include? I'm going to go over that at the end. So stick with me. Um, as I was saying, when I was trying to kind of come to terms with, get to grips with putting a diet together for Lucky, I was coming across a lot of different recipes that were coming from either the US or the UK. And at the time being in Mexico, I couldn't access a lot of those ingredients. And I wasn't able to find ways of adapting very easily. I wasn't finding ways to adapt the recipes that I was finding into things that were actually available in the local area where I was, and how I could understand the way to make substitutions. And so, with that in mind, I wanted to say that this book is very much a recipe book, as opposed to a book that really teaches you how to think about building meals and feeding your dog, meaning that it gives you recipes, lots of different recipes actually, that are formulated to meet AFCO guidelines, and in many cases actually go above the minimum of those guidelines. But it relies completely upon you following the recipe to a T in order to have a quote unquote complete and balanced recipe. And because of that, it takes the approach of balancing every meal versus balancing over time. And I've mentioned previously, but I'll reiterate it here. I think it works. I think it's, and for me, it's an easier way to do things. I think it's more in line with how dogs would eat naturally to balance over time. And that time can be just over a few days, a week, or it can be over a couple of weeks. Again, depending on your dog's health, various, particular conditions, and taking into consideration, like which nutrients need to be replenished on a daily basis and which ones can be replenished every couple of days. So I'm not necessarily somebody who is a huge proponent of balancing each meal. But if that is something that works for you, if that is something you feel more comfortable with, then this book is full of recipes that will help you do that, because each and every recipe is quote unquote complete and balanced within itself. So I just wanted to put that out there. So although the book is packed with lots of great information, the fact that it is specifically recipe focused presents Basically, four factors that I think you may want to take into consideration as you are thinking about feeding your dog in this way. So, the first thing is that I feel like the recipes can be a little bit complicated, particularly if you're new to fresh feeding or you don't like relying upon a recipe. I think it's absolutely incredible that this book is in the mainstream and making people aware of the possibility of feeding dogs fresh food. But I think if you're just coming across fresh feeding and you come across this book, it can feel like, whoa, this is information overload and this feels like it would be too difficult. So I just want to kind of preface that I think that it can be a little bit complicated if you are looking for something a little bit more simple and you're looking for kind of basic guidance on how to do this yourself might not best suit what it is that you're looking for. Also, many of the ingredients that are used in these recipes include things like cloves and shellfish in order to meet nutrient requirements that AFCO is specifying. And the reality is that not all dogs are going to like these ingredients or even be able to tolerate that. And since there isn't an easy guide on how to make substitutions, I think that this can potentially be a problem. Number two, so this is more of a caution generally on how to use the book, not something specifically about the book itself. I just want to say that remember that just sticking to one recipe that is fresh, made of fresh food is in many respects the fresh food equivalent of keeping your dog on the same kibble for life. I know that Karen and Rodney encourage you to try different recipes in order to create variety, but I also know how easy it can be to slip into that rut that when you've got a recipe, you just sort of stick with it. So, what I would say is that yes, formulated recipes definitely have their place and are really helpful for a number of different reasons. And I actually often formulate diets for clients, especially when we need to tailor things to a particular health condition, for example. But again, the formulator is just a guide, and it can't tell you, for example, exactly how much zinc is in that piece of beef liver that's in your dog's bowl, nor can it tell you how much of the zinc that's in that piece of beef liver is going to be absorbed effectively in your particular dog's body. So the formulations are guidelines. They're not like absolute capital T truth. But even when I'm creating recipes for clients, I create multiple recipes for them to follow because variety is so important. Variety means that our dogs are exposed to more nutrients from different sources. And creating variety in our dog's diet also helps to reduce the risk of them developing food intolerances by being exposed to the same. Mostly it happens with proteins, but being exposed to the same foods over and over again. So, my caution is that if you're going to use the recipes, if you're going to follow these recipes, I encourage you to make sure that you use a few different ones and make sure you're varying the proteins. So, for example, don't just do all chicken recipes or all beef recipes or whatever. Create a kind of mix. And I definitely recommending creating a mix of white meats and dark meats, well, red meats, I should say. So, and also, if you happen to know your dog's energetics, choose recipes if you can that support his or her energetic profile. But we'll get into a little bit more detail on the energetic stuff in just a second. So, number three, this is linked to what I mentioned about the issue of some of the ingredients. The book doesn't actually educate you on why something is included in the diet and how you can adjust the recipe according to what is actually available to you at any given time. And although it does reference why some ingredients are added for certain things, it doesn't really make it easy for you to make substitutions to know how to do that for yourself. And I just think that it makes it really hard to follow and do in real life for most of us. Now, this also links to dogs being individuals. Just because a particular ingredient is deemed a quote unquote superfood doesn't actually mean that it's great for every dog. Like Rita Hogan said in my interview with her when we were talking about energetics, that every ingredient, every food that can reduce inflammation can actually cause inflammation in another context. So I want to take turmeric, for example, because you've no doubt heard about this as a superfood to counter inflammation, particularly for things like joint issues, arthritis, that sort of a thing. And in fact, turmeric is used throughout this book. It's in a lot of the different recipes because they are huge fans of it as an anti inflammatory agent. However, if you take energetics into account, we have to note that turmeric is a warming spice, which means that it heats the body up. Now, if you were to put that in a dog who leans towards already a warm or hot personal energetics, you're now pushing that dog towards an inflamed disease state, which is the exact thing that you're trying to avoid by giving them turmeric in the first place. So, again, we have to look at the individual dog, and the recipes in this book don't take energetics into account. So, you have to do a little sleuthing for yourself. On this note about superfoods, I also wanted to swing back around to a conversation that I had had with Surabhi Venkatesh about superfoods because we're often told, like, add blueberries, add the turmeric, add broccoli that you've chopped and left exposed to air for 90 minutes, and these are all gonna really help your dog, and that can very much be true, again, depending on the individual dog. But I think that we need to recognize that, yes, diet is absolutely 100% one way that we can take we can give our dog the best shot at great health and longevity, but it doesn't necessarily mean that your dog isn't going to get sick. And it also doesn't mean that if your dog does get sick, that you have failed them. And I really want to bring that up because I think that there's so much pressure in the fresh feeding community around doing all that we can to keep our dogs as healthy for as long as possible. And I 100% support that. But I think we also need to balance that out with recognizing that we do the best that we can at any given time. And I say this because absolutely as a canine nutrition consultant, I have definitely seen the way that improving a diet can have dramatic health effects for a dog. So I'm absolutely a proponent of doing what we can to improve the diet. But I've also had clients that have come to me where they've read about all these superfoods. And so they're literally throwing all of them in the bowl and then wondering why their dog either has tummy upsets or is turning their nose at the food because there's too much in the bowl. And they're getting really frustrated and concerned. And they also have supplement graveyards. So there's all of this issue, right? Like they're getting everything in, throwing it all at the dog, and then are feeling really frustrated. And I've also seen many of these clients break down in tears in front of me because they're just so overwhelmed with the fact that they're just trying to do the very best that they can for their dogs. But despite that, they still fear that they're really failing them. So I wanted to bring that into the conversation because I think it's an important one when we're thinking about how to best support our dogs. Because it's really about finding balance and listening to your dog, listening to nature and feeding according to the seasons and your location. It's knowing that, yes, taking control of your dog's diet is 100% is about giving them their best shot at health and longevity. But it absolutely does not mean that you have failed if your dog gets sick. And I also think that it's important to remind ourselves too that if you are feeding kibble and you feel like you are being shamed by the fresh food community, that's not right either. We do the best we can with where we're at, with the knowledge that we have at the time. And as we learn more and as we can do more, then we do better. And that's all that we can do, is all that we can ask of ourselves or of anyone else. So I just feel like it's really important to remind ourselves of that. Okay, on to my final thing that you might want to consider. Number 4. This is something that I do think that we really should be thinking about from the perspective of not just looking at what it means to balance the bowl from the perspective of the nutrients that are in the bowl that we have devised according to a formulator, but actually how a food really serves our dogs and their health on multiple levels. So the recipes in this book exclusively rely on eggshell powder or bone meal as the calcium source. And this raises a couple of serious issues for me. So firstly, if you listened to the interview that I did with Dr. Tom Lonsdale, you'll know that he talks about raw meaty bones as being the absolute core to keeping our dogs healthy. And I 100% agree with them. Dogs were born to eat raw meaty bones, and doing so keeps their teeth and gums healthy, which in turn keeps their organs healthy. And the act of chewing these bones signals to the stomach to increase gastric acid production, which is great for keeping out pathogens as well. And bones have the ideal calcium to phosphorus ratio. And so the recipes in this book, they are recommending eggshells, for example, when the recipes themselves have higher levels of phosphorus, because eggshell powder does not have phosphorus in it, it's calcium carbonate. And all that, although that's a great and kind of useful option for calcium for particular cases, like some dogs with kidney disease, for example, might benefit from that. That form of calcium is a lesser bioavailable form. And again, it doesn't allow your dog the opportunity to chew. Chewing bones is also so helpful for dogs with anxiety and reactivity. And to me, it's primal for how dogs actually ground their energy. And so I absolutely feel like they need to be prioritized in a dog's diet where it's suitable. And although I know that Karen and Rodney are big proponents of raw meaty bones for the reasons that I shared, the recipes themselves use bone meal and eggshells. So if you're going to be using these recipes, I would suggest adding in recreational raw meaty bones for your dog. So recreational bones are bones that your dog is not actually meant to consume. So they're not eating it. Therefore, they're not using it as their calcium source. So you want to think of things like beef knuckle bones as an example. They're too large and dense to actually be consumed, but by ripping and tearing any meat and sinew off of the bones and kind of chewing against it, that helps to keep your dog's teeth clean, and it provides mental stimulation. So, these are some of my thoughts about the book and things to consider if you decide to use this book as your primary way to create your dog's meals. It is a fantastic resource for all kinds of things like how much garlic is safe for dogs, how to think about feeding your dogs different types of eggs, medicinal mushrooms, and it has great recipes that can offer inspiration for thinking about different ingredients and food combinations that you might like to try for your dog. It also has some really great suggestions on ways to limit the toxin load that your dog is exposed to by making simple switches in things like cleaning and grooming products, as well as natural pest repellents. However, if you're just wanting some simple guidance on how to feed your dog, you may find it a little bit too complicated for your liking. Feeding your dog well with fresh food really doesn't need to be complicated. Okay, so like I mentioned, I was going to give you a little bit more of a sense of the food pyramid for dogs so that you have a better idea of what your dog actually needs and why we might add something into the diet. So, this is based more on an ancestral model that I'm going to be sharing with you versus like a prey model raw way of feeding. And if you'd like to check out different feeding models, because again, there is no one way to feed a dog. So just to kind of reiterate that, I definitely recommend the Feed Real Institute's calculators that let you experiment with what different models might look like. And then you can figure out what works for you and your dog. So I've left the link to their site in the show notes if you want to check out the calculators. Okay, so this is basically how I generally start putting together a diet for a healthy adult dog. Remember, we do things a little bit differently for puppies and for dogs with health conditions. So this is just a base model that we start with and always adjust for the dog's individual needs. All right, so I'm gonna hold this up too, in case that's helpful. Let's see if you can actually see that. Or is the ring light glaring? There we go. Let's work with that. Okay, I'm going to read from my notes because I can't see the board. All right. So we generally start with about 70 to 80% muscle meat. So what do I mean by muscle meat? The meat that you would get at the store or at the butcher's, right? It's just normal human grade meat. 25%, up to 25%, I should say, of this 78 to 80% muscle meat can be things like muscular organs, which would be something like heart. So, muscle meat is going to provide your dog with protein, which is a whole host of amino acids, which are the building blocks of the body. It also provides things like B vitamins and healthy fats, loads of good stuff. Next, we're going to prioritize 5% liver. So, if you think of liver as the dog's multivitamin, that's really helpful. It contains things like vitamin A, D, zinc, and copper. So, we only need a little bit of it, but it is important to include in your dog's diet. The other thing that we want to add is 5% of a second secreting organ. So, secreting organs are organs that release things like hormones into the body. So, think of things like kidney, spleen, pancreas, even testes. Then we want to prioritize 10% bone, but this is going to vary. So this is just sort of general guidelines, and you always want to work with the dog in front of you. Some dogs do well with more bone, and some dogs actually require a little bit less. And one way that we really kind of assess all of that is to look at the dog's poos. How are they doing with that? So it is a matter of just sort of monitoring how your individual dog is doing, and then you make adjustments accordingly. And I've included vegetables here. Not everybody feels like vegetables are a necessity. In fact, they're not. Dogs don't have a biological need for carbohydrates, but I think low glycemic vegetables, so that's low sugar vegetables, are amazing to add into a dog's diet. So think of things like dark leafy greens like kale and spinach, cabbage, that kind of a thing. Broccoli is another great one. They provide really valuable fiber and phytonutrients. So those are nutrients that your dog can't get from animal products. So I always like to add in vegetables into both Lucky's food, and where dogs that I'm working with clients can actually tolerate it, I add in vegetables for them as well. And then we add in things like omega-3 fatty acids and vitamin D through things like small oily fish and eggs. We want to add something in for vitamin E, which is something like wheat germ oil. You can also use wheatgrass powder or barley grass powder. We need to add in a source of iodine for our dogs for thyroid health, and they only need a little bit of it, but we do need to make sure that it's present. And oftentimes we use kelp for that. And then we want to think about balancing the fats in our proteins. So in the diet generally, but look, it's based upon which source you're using, which protein type you're using. So we're going to add in either flax or chia seeds or oil when we're feeding things like poultry and pork, because these tend to be higher in omega-6 fatty acids, and we want to balance them out with alpha linolenic acid, which is an omega-3. If you're primarily feeding ruminants like beef or venison, then we want to add in something like hemp seeds because this provides the omega-6 acid, linolenic acid. All right. So, because I take a balance over time approach, over the course of the week, what I tend to do for Lucky and what I suggest to clients is that we vary the different proteins that we're using. So, I tend to offer him, like, say, turkey one day and duck the next day and beef the next day and pork, or even like between meals kind of thing, like one kind of in the breakfast and one kind in the evening meal. You don't have to do it like that, but I like to make sure that he's got a lot of different variety, and that makes it easier for me to ensure that he is getting nutrients from a variety of different sources. Some people will do like a week's worth of the same protein, and then the second week they rotate. So long as you're adding rotation into the diet, you're generally going to make sure that you're hitting all of the nutrient requirements. I also, a little note on that too, I also try to make sure that I'm varying the cuts of meat. So, for example, that maybe one shopping trip, I'm prioritizing something like, say, chicken thighs, and the next time I'm adding in chicken, it's going to be chicken breast, that kind of a thing. So, again, because different cuts of meat will have different nutrient profiles, so I'm adding more variety to the diet. Now, in terms of like how much to feed, I generally am less calories oriented and more percentage of body weight oriented. And then I just adjust according to how the actual dog in front of me is responding to this. The Forever Dog Life book is based upon calories, so I just want to mention that because personally, I've never found calorie counting helpful for me, and I don't do it for Lucky. I follow the guideline of feeding roughly 2 to 3% of the healthy adult dog's body weight, with smaller breeds leaning more towards 2.5 to 3% body weight because they have higher metabolisms than larger dogs. But again, this is a rough guide. This is how I feed Lucky, and then I just adjust. So, for example, in the summer, he doesn't want to eat as much because it's really hot. But in the winter, he's been known to ask for seconds. And fortunately, since he's not a lab, and I definitely have a lot of like compassion for you guys with labs that will just eat anything at any time, Lucky doesn't do that. So if he's asking for seconds, I know that he generally is hungry, and so I add a little bit more for him. But I always use the body condition score as my guide to ensure that he stays lean. And again, I encourage clients to do the same. So I've left this guide in the show notes because I think it's a really useful way of monitoring your dog's weight without using a scale. It gives you visuals so you can see what your dog should look like from the side. So looking for the tuck of the abdomen, and also looking at your dog from above, a kind of bird's eye view where you want to see that there is an indentation. I mean, it goes in towards the hips. It also gives you some guides for how your dog should actually physically feel to your touch as you run your hand over their rib cage to make sure that there is a small layer of fat, but that you can still feel the ribs. And they've got some really useful guides for experiencing that. And I find that's really helpful to monitor your dogs. Okay, so what about superfoods and as toppers and supplements? Well, this is where I say any supplement that we're going to be adding should be added with purpose. It's why I think knowing the reason that you're adding something into the diet is so important. And again, just because a supplement is deemed quote unquote good doesn't actually mean it's good for your dog. So again, like Rita mentioned, there are herbs, for example, that are great supplements for cool dogs for a particular purpose, but those same herbs can send a warm dog into a disease state. So really treat your dog as an individual. Also, when we're looking to supplement with purpose, I find it helpful to take a whole body, whole systems perspective. So, as an example, I get asked a lot because Lucky is reactive. I get asked about what supplements can help with a dog's reactivity. And the reality is, the answer isn't as simple as, well, just feed lion's mane mushrooms because they're good for the brain. Reactivity stems from a variety of different issues, ranging from microbiome imbalance, malabsorption of B vitamins, or even from a TCM perspective, imbalances in the liver or kidney, just to name a few. So sometimes it's as simple as switching to proteins that supports a dog's energetics and you'll see changes in behavior, while at other times it's about supporting the liver or the kidneys, and other times supplementing with methylated B vitamins because they're easier for the dog's body to be absorbed. And I'll say that with any way that I do supplementation, I always start simple and slow. We can tend to want to throw every supplement under the sun at our dogs, but in reality, when we pare it back and when we start really slowly, that can often yield the most benefit. And remember, it always depends on the individual dog. And this is again where having someone help you look at this this bigger picture perspective can help you to target for your dog and save you a lot of time, money, and heartache. So, those are just some of my thoughts on the Forever Dog Life book and a quick guide on building your dog's diet. So, I'm curious, like, was that helpful for you? And what are your thoughts? Do you have the book? And if so, do you have any favorite recipes that you've tried? I'd love to hear how you're finding it and what recipes your dog is loving. So again, like I said, I'm going to be doing some more in this series around talking about different aspects of nutrition and how to use fresh foods to optimize your dog's health. So if you have particular topics you'd like me to cover or you've got any particular questions, please send me a DM on Instagram at Mystic Dog Mama, and I will definitely cover that. And I'm also happy to put together some different guides or resources that you would find helpful as you try to put together your dog's diet. So let me know if there's something in particular you're struggling with. And if you would like a guide, if you'd like me to kind of create a guide for you, let me know. I will put that together. And again, just let me know on on Instagram at Mystic Dog Mama. And if you'd like some extra support in designing your dog's diet, or you've got a dog with a health condition and you just need a little bit of hand holding and work some professional support around how to actually put a diet together that's going to best support your dog's health journey, I would be more than happy to support you on this. I am opening up consults for or bookings for canine nutrition consults. So if you're interested in one of those, you want to know more about what that entails, send me a DM on Instagram at Mystic Dog Mama and let me know what's going on with your dog. And then I can send you some more information. Okay, on that note, I look forward to seeing you in our next summer series solo episode. And until next time.